Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, June the 11th. And as we like to do from time to time, we like to touch base with our good friend Richard Baehr. Richard, of course, one of the founders of the American Thinker, as well as a very prolific columnist in his own right. So, Richard, welcome. And I promise not to ask any questions about the White Sox.
All right. That's a favor. Uh,
That's a favor.
enjoy.
Yes,
Happy to be back.
yes. Thank you so much. Great to have you. Well, there was a big story today, of course, the Hunter Biden conviction. And I thought it was a pretty straightforward case. I mean, I didn't think that I would have been very surprised had he been not convicted. But
Right.
I thought it was a pretty straightforward case. A person with an addiction problem trying to buy a gun. I mean, I thought it was a pretty straightforward case. What was
Right.
your reaction, Richard?
Yeah, I think that's true. And pretty much everyone who looked at it said it was a pretty clean case in the sense that this didn't take very long. There weren't that many things that the prosecutor had to get on the table, and there really was no defense. So the issue is only whether this results in any kind of sentence that could take Hunter Biden off the streets, or whether this is viewed as a first offense, and under the circumstances, he gets a little bit of a pass. Now, one wonders, of course, because these cases are inevitably tied, how this will deal with the 34 felonies of Donald Trump for a bookkeeping error in terms of how he dealt with paying legal fees. Uh, I mean, which is it's an absurd case, that one, compared to this one, really, for many reasons. The most serious of which for me is the prosecutor ran for office saying he was going to get Trump. And for anyone who wants to talk about nobody above the law, nobody below the law, whatever that means, prosecutors running to say they're going to get you. I don't know how much different that is from
Right.
Lawrence Beria and the Soviet Union. So, I mean, I think Hunter Biden, this case is a problem for the president. I think it takes away a decent amount of whatever momentum they think they picked up with a conviction in New York.
Right. I thought it was interesting, Richard, on that score, that the first speech that President Biden gives minutes after the indictment or the conviction, they had this on the schedule. So it's not,
Right.
it was a program on gun violence.
Right.
So I just thought, my gosh, this poor fellow doesn't catch a break. I mean, he just, he does,
Right.
he doesn't seem to catch a break anywhere. But I thought what was really interesting about this case was the judge. I mean, there was a very serious judge here.
Mm-hmm.
Someone, if I remember correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the judge who basically, when she got the whatever agreement they had before, she said, "I don't like this,"
Right.
and in a sense forced the case.
Right.
So I thought she was a very good judge
Right.
in that respect. And what a contrast, Richard, to the judge in New York.
Right.
I mean, you have two judges here who obviously have they understand their profession a little bit differently. Bill. I mean,
Right.
Richard.
Well, you have a situation where in New York, everybody hates Trump. And in Delaware, pretty much everybody likes Biden, or at least views him and his family as being the first family of the state. So that was a question some people had as to whether, just given his standing in the state, that they could ignore what were pretty obvious facts and maybe not convict him. And it looks like, to their credit, this jury looked at it and said, we don't really have a choice on this. This is a laydown. And they went ahead with it. The New York case is, again, problematic on so many levels. And people who are pretty fair minded, like Andrew McCarthy and Jonathan Turley, neither of whom is any kind of screaming Trump backer, both looked at this and had, were listing multiple areas where this case could be reversed on error that occurred either by the judge, not allowing the FEC witness, allowing Stormy Davis to go through all kinds of stuff that were completely irrelevant to the purpose of the case. So, I mean, this was a setup job. And in addition to everything else, it lasted 6 weeks, whereas this case with Hunter Biden was
Right.
less than 2 weeks. And doesn't matter. Hunter Biden's not running for office, but Trump is. So for 6 weeks, he's not able to go anywhere, not able to make any appearances. and he lives off that vibe. There's no candidate I know who gets off more on essentially the audience reaction and sort of feeds into him and how he behaves. So having him stuck in New York, making a few minutes speech, after court ends every day is simply not the same thing.
No, you're right. But I bring that back to the judge.
Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
that the judge I think the judge in New York, if he was an honest man or an honest judge, he would have looked at the case even before the trial and dropped it and said, this is not a case for me.
I agree.
And I think he would have looked at the district attorney Bragg and said, hey, Alvin, if you want to go after federal charges, I think that the office is a couple of blocks down the street.
Right.
Why don't you take it down there? So I just think the judge here is the big story or the comparison. But here's something else too and I want to get your reaction to this. All of this today, or this whole case, or this whole crime, or investigation, or whatever, was made possible by a laptop. Mm-hmm. Had the laptop been opened or been allowed to be disseminated back in October of 2020, had this whole thing been put out, I believe, and I think there are polls that show this, that would have given Trump just a little enough edge to win re-election. And then the whole laptop thing would have just disappeared.
Right.
Because I don't think he would have pursued it. I think he would have said, hey, for the interest of the country, let's just drop all of this. So what an ironic thing. Right. And those 51 people who signed that letter, they've got to be wondering, what the heck were we drinking?
Right.
I mean, so
it had a purpose. Remember, the letter was written and signed. The whole process was coordinated by Anthony Blinken, now the Secretary of State, who's a longtime, toady to Biden's political career, served in the Obama administration, also working with Biden then. And if you look at Nate Silver, who's one of the more honest guys, I mean, he's on the left, but he's very smart. He's put together some of the best models, which incorporate tremendous amounts of history and current data. In 2016, he said that the reason Trump won and Hillary lost was because James Comey reopened the email investigation 2 weeks before Election Day. And he looked at polls in the 2 weeks before Comey made that decision, and then in the actual election results 2 weeks after. Hillary lost about 2 points in the polls as a result of the public exposure. And that was just re-exposing something that was already out there that people already knew about. And yet at 2 points made a big difference because Trump won Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin by less than that. That was his margin of victory. So what happens in 2020? Just like you say, Trump lost by 4%, but the 3 key states he lost, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona, were all under 1%. Pennsylvania was just over 1%. Now, let's assume the same thing, except here, arguably, it's a bigger deal because it's fresh. It's a news story, not one that people had a chance to go through, a couple of months earlier and then just back on the stage again. This is a story suggesting the president's got a kid who's using his father to basically make a lot of money for himself. And that's a bigger story than the pornography or, the Stormy Davis aspect of the laptop. And that would have come out. But instead, it was completely discredited as Russian propaganda. And remember, why would the Russians get involved in this except if they wanted to have a foreign policy angle? So they were hanging Biden out to dry if, as a result of what happened in Ukraine. And they got away with it. So these 50 guys signed a letter knowing exactly what they were doing. They were trying to essentially keep this story contained and make it seem like, well, this is the new story of the day. The Russians get involved every 4 years.
Yeah, I know. And the whole thing was allowed to happen. And even some of the major media organizations did not carry it. But the other thing, too, where I think it also had an impact is in the second debate, where I thought Trump was doing very well in that debate. And he was carrying the debate, toward his son, Hunter and Joe. And this, letter basically broke up that debate in a sense that you didn't really have the
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I think that, and I have many friends in the media, and most of the time, they've treated me very well. But I wonder if some people in the media are starting to wonder if it was worth doing so much to help Biden at the expense of their own reputation as professionals. The media has taken a big beating here in the
Right.
polls,
Yeah.
and you have to wonder at what point do they say, you know what, let's go back to being journalists.
Right.
I
Well,
don't know.
yeah, I think people who were journalists in an older generation, 20, 30 years ago, where, yeah, the journalists still lean to the left by and large, but if they were interested in a scoop, they wanted a story, they wanted to get the facts out, they wanted to be first. This is kind of a different era, and people who go to journalism schools, the same people who go into divinity schools or going to study, gender studies or women's studies or any other area studies, they're advocates. They come out advocates. They have a cause. And it's unfortunate to think that people coming out of journalism school are looking at themselves as allies of a political party or a political cause. But that seems to be what we have right now. And you're having these little civil wars in the newsrooms of the New York Times and the Washington Post because there's been, exactly like you suggested, a little bit of a pushback against this zealotry. And the radicals and the young, they got all the right degrees. So how can you fire somebody who went to Yale even though he's a communist? But yeah,
Yeah.
this is what they're having to deal with.
Right. I thought it was kind of funny, that story in the Washington Post where that new guy came in to clean the place, and he looks at these people and he says, "Folks, nobody's reading what you're writing."
Right.
I mean, that was direct quote from
Exactly.
the man.
Yeah.
And that's sad, because I do think we need a good media. Always felt that, and as I say, I've been on the Spanish channels here in Dallas several times, and they've always treated me very well.
Right.
And I feel like, they're very responsible in how they do things.
Yeah, I was on the public television station in Chicago, the TV station. They would invite me when they had a panel, and they wanted one from the right wing, the crazy side, to balance the person who was their chosen guest. But they were fair. The moderators did a decent job. They gave us pretty much equal time. And most of the people I was on with were civil. There are some who don't want to appear with someone who doesn't disagree with them anymore. That's kind of the silos that are building up inside the country right now, which is a very dangerous phenomenon. But most people were decent and were respectful, which is all you can ask for.
I agree. I think it's getting very, very dangerous. But no, I think you're okay now. Go ahead and say something.
Hello?
Yeah, you're there.
Hello?
You're there. For a minute there.
Okay.
For a minute there, the internet had something to do with us. I think it intervened. But can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. I think we're back on. So I just wanted, there may be about a 10-second internet break there, but that's okay. That happens when we do these things. But I just feel that they're going to have to reconsider. Many in the press are going to have to reconsider how they behaved in the last few years, because I think many of them did a lot of harm to the profession, and they're paying for it because people are more skeptical now. I think the big issue, though, for Hunter Biden, I'm not expecting him to go to jail. Frankly, if they put him on probation, I'm okay with that.
Yes, same here.
Yeah, I mean,
he seems to put his life a little bit back in order.
Right,
He's married. Exactly. I mean, I'm okay. I give people second chances.
I do too. So I give him a second chance, put him on probation, and move on. The big issue, though, is September, the tax trial, because there may be a connection to his father. And if there isn't one, I'd be very surprised, Richard, because all the money that look, this guy was being put on the board of directors of energy companies,
right, with no knowledge.
This guy was, funneling money. I mean, representing foreign countries and agencies. This guy, all he had was a last name. That's all he ever had.
Right.
So I do think that's a more dangerous trial.
Right.
For President Biden, Richard.
Right. Well, again, the goal of the original federal prosecutor in this case was to get these cases settled. and they allowed the statute of limitations to run on some of them, which were probably the most politically explosive, so that they could get down to look like a plea bargain on the gun charge and maybe penalties and payment on the tax charge. But one of the things is that there are enough independent journalists, and there's still an alternate universe of people who don't think like the New York Times, that kept this story alive. And it wound up being much more costly to Biden and his family than would have been the case, like you suggested again earlier, had this thing simply played its natural course.
Yeah. No, and the September case is also federal, right?
Right. It's best I understand.
Which is more dangerous. The federal courts are always, I think, better probably when it comes to these cases.
It is California, however. In California, you could get a similar, regardless of the facts and circumstances, get a jury pool similar to Manhattan.
Well, that's true. That's true. They need to bring that case in-house. Move it away from the coast somehow.
Right.
But you're right. It could have that effect. But a lot of information is going to come out in that case.
Yeah. No, everybody's covering these things. The election's in 5 months. They can't not cover it.
Right. But another thing too, Richard, that I think is a bit ironic. The Democrats have been obsessed with having trials for Trump in the middle of the election. And now we're going to have a trial for Joe Biden in the middle of the campaign. I think that's pretty crazy. Mm-hmm. I don't think that was part of the plan.
Right. No, so I don't think so at all. And again, they were hoping for a settlement on both of these cases, a plea bargain. And so they assumed the only litigation they were going to see on TV and covered ad nauseum by the media were in fact the variety of Trump cases. And they counted on there being multiple cases. I don't think they thought one case was a knockout blow, but if you're trying to take low information voters or not regular voters or independents who don't hate either one of them but aren't enthusiastic about either one of them, they figured that 2 cases or 3 cases or 4 cases, they're going to look at this guy and say, he can't be president. This is ridiculous.
Right.
But it turned out it looks like there may only be one. And it's a case that even, people who were not sympathetic to Trump thought was a little bit of a setup.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes get the feeling that they must have called this judge in New York and said, Juan, you're the only card we got. He knew what his job was. Yes, he sure did. Because the Georgia case is gone.
I think so.
The document case, if it's not gone, it's going to be very difficult to find Trump guilty after what happened with Biden.
Right.
And with Hillary Clinton. So that's
of course Trump could go into trial and act like he's brain dead, and he might be able to get off too.
Might get away with it. And then of course the January 6th trial, I think that's all tied up in the courts, and God only knows when that'll come out.
Right.
Maybe soon, I don't know.
Yeah.
So really it came down to a situation, Richard, where this thing in New York was all they had.
Right.
And that, I don't think that was part of the plan either. That was all. Well, let me ask you a couple of quick questions. None of this seems to be having any effect on the head-to-head polls that I see. Maybe you've seen something different, but the polls have not changed much. That is Trump versus Biden. Is that just what you were expecting, or is that just a sign of the times that people have made their choice and they're going to go with it no matter what?
Yeah. There have been some small changes that people who are poring over this with thick glasses suggest that there's been a little bit of a movement from independents, either from undecided towards Biden or from Trump to undecided, and a very small number from Trump directly to Biden. But the national average lead for Trump has dropped from just over 1% to 0.5%. That's not a big deal. So far, there are no state polls that would suggest that Arizona, Georgia, some of the key states have had any significant differential. They haven't. And it's not surprising that no single bit of news at this point moves the needle very much. It's like everybody knows both of these candidates. They know what they like about them, if they like them in general. They know what they don't like about them. And there's 20% of the country who are now described in the polls as double haters.
Right.
I mean, we've never had such a thing in American politics before.
Although Richard, I think a future historian will write a book about, the making of 2024, and he will say that was probably the best opportunity for a third party candidate that we ever had in a long time.
Right.
Because I really do believe there would have been a tremendous opening here
Right.
for a third party candidate to at least win the electoral college. I'm not sure about the votes, but
I think, for instance, if Robert Kennedy didn't have the speaking issue he had, if he could communicate as he could have 10 or 15 years ago, his numbers might be double what they are now. They'd have to have him in the debate. And coming into a debate as the fresh face compared to these two, 77 and 81, each of whom served a term, both of them having majorities of the country who don't want him to be president. There's an opportunity here. This would have been an unusual situation.
I think so. I think this probably would have been the best year for that. One last question, and I know this changes a lot, but when I look at the Senate right now, it tends to be favoring Republicans. Of course, West Virginia, let's start with that. But some of the others, I've seen some polling data in the Midwest where you have some Democrat incumbents who are under 50%. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious your impression of the Senate. Mm-hmm. Where do you think it's going to end up if you had to make an early call?
Right. The odds are that the Republicans will get to 51 at least, though not a certainty, because only one is really in the bag, and that's West Virginia with Manchin retiring. The Republicans' best opportunity beyond that, which gets them to 50, which would mean if the Republicans won the White House, then you have the Republican vice president breaking any ties. The Republicans can get their appointments approved for the executive branch and the courts. So it's kind of critical that they get to 51, because that's a protection in case they don't win the White House and nominees are kind of tempted to be stuffed down their throats. The best chance they have is Montana, where John Tester has won 3 terms, always close. And this year he's probably particularly vulnerable because in Montana, the state is more Republican in presidential years than it is in the midterm elections. And Trump will win the state by between 15 and 20 points. So that's a lot of people who have to switch for him to get reelected. And the Republicans have come up with a candidate who's got a great military background. I mean, they're running nonstop ads against him, the Democrats are, accusing him of being out-of-state person who came to Montana late in life, I think at age 10 or something like that. It's not good enough. No. You're the same. You're also, someone who's slid in, and I'm somebody who's just slid. Right. But the other ones where I think that there's decent chances, Nevada is a possibility because the state is moving towards the Republicans on the presidential level, and the current senator Jackie Rosen, is okay, but she hasn't excited anybody. Nobody, probably a fair percentage of the population, couldn't identify her. One that's a little disappointing is Sherrod Brown. Looks like he's holding on pretty well in Ohio, and he's a survivor. He seems to manage to sort of know how to fit his image, so he takes a tune of the state, which is very much kind of working class populist in terms of its orientation. The other ones where Republicans have a shot are Michigan, which is an open seat, and the Democrat candidate is a Jewish woman. It's sad to say, but that could probably hurt her in Michigan right now in an open seat race. Arizona, if Kari Lake didn't win the governor's race, I think it's less likely that she'll win the Senate race. Gallegos seems to be softening his image, trying to come off now as a centrist and a moderate and the reasonable one of the two. So even though Republicans have 6 or 7 shots, you got to win them, not just come close. And they have had a bad record of winning close races in the last couple cycles, especially in Georgia.
Yes, Georgia is such an incredible state. I mean, very Republican, very red with 2 really, but very liberal senators. But that's the part that amazes me, that, they elect 2 very liberal senators.
Yeah,
I mean, they're so out of touch with Georgia. It's amazing.
Right. Now Georgia has this oddity that you got to get 50% where they have the runoff, Ossoff would have been defeated without that. In fact,
Yes.
the Republican who ran against him had 49.8% and won by 2%,
Right.
which is not insignificant. It's like a 90,000 vote difference, and all had no use in the end at the runoff. You're starting from scratch.
That's right. And I remember that was the 2020 when they had
Right.
2 seats actually
Right.
available. Well, Richard, I want to thank you as always for your time and for giving us your time. And thank you very much for your input. Have a wonderful day and best of luck. Oh, by the way, do you have any favorites on the NHL or NBA finals?
Yeah, I think the Celtics are in pretty good shape. I mean,
Yes.
our household is pro Mavericks because my wife's from Slovenia, so
All
Luka
right.
Doncic, pretty powerful connection. I mean, her relatives, staying up till 2 a.m. to watch the games over in Slovenia.
Right.
Hockey, right now, Florida looks unbeatable.
Yes.
So I'd have to go with the favorites. Go with the chalk this time.
Right. But one thing that amazes me is that this was the first time, I think, in a long time that a Canadian team was in the final.
Finals, yeah.
That's a shocking thing to hear.
Right.
You know, I remember at one time when all the teams were up there.
Yeah.
It
They have the
seems
best
like it.
player. I mean, Connor McDavid is a stud.
Yes.
But hockey, you're out there for 35 seconds and then a new line's coming on. So
That's right. Well, when Edmonton played Dallas, it was kind of like the battle for petroleum or something. Because
the Oil Bowl.
the Oil Bowl, because here you had Alberta, the source of oil in Texas. So I just thought that was an interesting battle.
Could you get a more absurd kind of combination of teams than Miami and Edmonton?
I know. And I feel sorry for the players because of their travels. I mean, it's 2-2 and then 1-1-1.
Right.
It's ridiculous. I mean, they should do 2-3 and 2. I mean,
exactly.
I don't know how they handle. And you go from Miami to Edmonton. That is a heck of a flight.
Yeah.
To have to do it like they do it. So, but they fly first class. I know,
Right.
but still, that's a lot of wear and tear on your body. Well, Richard, thank you. Have a great day.
Okay.
And, thank you as always. Thank you so much for being a part of it.
Okay. My best.
Thank you so much. Our good friend Richard Baehr, one of the founders of the American Thinker many years ago, and of course a very prolific writer and columnist, and always very, very well informed on what's going on politically in the country. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.